So let's dive right in. We've seen a flurry of announcements at this COP since we started last week that you've been involved in. There was methane, loss and damage, more than $50 in new funding. But now we're in the hard yards of COP negotiations. You said to Politico yesterday that the bottom line is that this COP needs to be committed to phasing out all unabated fossil fuel in the final text. Last night, Saudi Arabia's oil minister told Bloomberg in an interview that his country will not support any language around a phase down of fossil fuels. Does that make you worried that real ambition will get stymied at this COP by fossil fuel interests?
No, but let me begin first. First of all, John, great to be with you, and thank you to Bloomberg, and to Mike, particularly for his incredible commitment to this and what he's been able to do in a lot of fields, including getting rid of, literally, more than 500 coal plants in our country, and that's pretty significant, and we're doing pretty well, notwithstanding. But I want to begin just to underscore to everybody, because it's so critical. This moment is not just another moment. It's not inconsequential. It's not, it can't be business as usual in any regard. The dangers that we are facing, folks, and I am not an alarmist. I think most people know I've been pretty practical in trying to find solutions to challenges. But the dangers we face now are just monumental and even scary. And scientists are saying that. The best scientists in the world are saying what we face now is alarming, terrifying. These are quotes. And even we are in uncharted territory. Now, let me just say to you, it was 70 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Arctic last summer. It was 100 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in the Antarctic. And a massive ice sheet that has been tied up for whatever thousands of years, because it was so big and heavy, it was stuck in the mud, has now disappeared enough, melted enough that it floated, it's no longer stuck. It's moving out towards Georgia Island. It's going to melt. Just like 86 million metric tons of ice every single day in the Greenland. So we got to really decide, are we serious or are we fooling around with an existential issue? Existential. You hear that out of the mouths of sober politicians who are not playing politics, who really understand what's going on. So I do that as a preface because it has to be the guideline, the guidepost for everything we're thinking about and choosing to do. And the fact is, emissions are going up in too many places. And what the science says is, IPCC 2018, they could not have been more clear. They pointed the finger at all the people in positions of responsibility. You have 12 years within which to make the decisions and implement them, obviously, that will avoid the worst consequences of the climate crisis. That's science, mathematics, physics. And we're ignoring it in too many parts of the world. And so we're inviting the worst consequences. And we see what's happening. 18 $1 billion events in the US climate events last year. 18 $1 billion separate events. Meanwhile, 30 million people displaced in Pakistan. Record fires in Greece and parts of the world. Come on. When do we get sort of, really focused on this? And by the way, and I'll be very quick. This is not asking people to sacrifice, for God's sakes. We're not suggesting that in this transition to the new energy economy, a clean energy economy, you're going to have to give up something. On the contrary, 8 million people are dying every year around this planet from the bad air. It's pollution, folks. It's poison. And so, and yesterday or day before, I forget which, they blend together. We had a session on health, first ever session on health. The interconnection between health and climate. Largest cause of children being hospitalized in America every summer is environmentally induced asthma. We spend 55, 60 billion a year on that, for God's sakes. So I'll come into your, I promise, but I just want everybody.
But we are here now.
You know.
I think you've laid the table out very, very well.
Okay, here it is.
Yes.
We'll come in.
So the Saudis last night said we will not support.
What they
any
said is
language
they'll
around
not
the phase-
support an actual phase out, but I'm not here to excuse. I don't look. He can speak for himself, and he did yesterday. What we are for, the United States has said, and we said it in the G7, and all G7 members voted for this, that we are for the phase out of all unabated fossil fuel. Unabated. Why? Because the science says you have to reduce the emissions. And how can we be reducing the emissions if we're building a whole new set of coal-fired power plants, so forth? And they are in Asia. 550 gigawatts of coal power is backed up in the line for construction and permitting. So we're saying don't permit. And does that mean somebody's got to take a haircut? Yep. Does that mean we've got to come up with some kind of measurement of how we're going to manage these things? Yeah. And it's not irrational what I'm saying. What is irrational is permitting an unabated coal-fired power plant, which wipes out all the gains of other countries who are trying to do renewables and trying to do hydrogen, a whole bunch of different things. So we're for that.
Are you worried about a blocking coalition here
No,
at
I
this
think
COP?
no,
You have the
because
Russians, you have the Saudis, all very worried about this language around phasing down.
We've worked very closely with everybody, and we're working with them right now. There's a reason we were able to get a new fund for climate impact response, and that is that we worked all summer with Transition Committee meeting. We pushed in, even had one several weeks ago to try to resolve it, the 5th committee meeting, and we came to an agreement on the framework that we needed to make this happen. And think about it, 195 countries came to an agreement on this new fund with the modalities. We supported it. I even pushed in Sharm el-Sheikh that we would not just do it 2 years from now, which is what was perfectly agreeable to people. But I said, no, if this is really urgent, we should do it next year, not wait, not make the developing world think that we're not serious by just pushing it off. So we did it. Never has a COP ever passed on the first day anything, let alone something that was fairly controversial. We did. And in addition to that, we've had the first ever health day. We've had the first ever gender day. Because women, absolutely inevitably, most parts of the world are the biggest victims of the climate crisis because they do, the caretaking of the family, the getting the food, building finding some means of cooking the food and so forth. And they are also the most vulnerable in the sense that when there is a crisis, they're the ones who usually pay the highest cost.
If I could drag you back one last time to the question.
You don't have to drag me.
So are you confident that we will get phasing out of unabated fossil fuels?
I don't know. I'm not saying what it will be. I'm saying we will find a way to do something that I think is realistic and finds the appropriate terminology and framework within which to be able to do our job.
The other point that the Saudis and others make is about hypocrisy. They're being called on to do more, and yet they would point out that I think right now the US is producing a record amount of oil itself, just as you're making these calls. Isn't it time for the US to walk the walk on this as well?
Well, we are walking the walk. On the contrary, President Biden has done more than any other president in history. And he got the IRA passed, and the IRA was $369 billion of tax incentive. But because it doesn't have a ceiling, it has a floor, we've probably got about $1 trillion already, and it's moving like crazy. And there's more money, venture capital, $1.7 trillion moving into that sector than we ever imagined. So we're seeing a lot going on. I'm actually really encouraged, to be truthful with you. I think that there's just a change of spirit. Actually, there's a change of spirit in this COP. And I've been to COP since 1992 when we created the framework of the UN Convention in Rio. And I can tell you, I've never seen one that's more ambitious, that's pulling as many different threads of how we respond together. So we have a shipping challenge. Let me just share with you. We have, well, first of all, we had sunny lands. We spent 4 days with the Chinese. We came up with an agreement with the Chinese that all greenhouse gases will be contained in NDCs now going forward. That's a big deal. because even China didn't even include their NDC. In addition, we agreed that we will both accelerate the deployment of renewables with a specific view to having a deployment of additional, to reducing emissions in the 2020s, which is a real move for China to accelerate. We have a methane summit just the other day. We expected to probably raise about $200 million in order to help countries reduce their methane. Over $1 billion on the table, real money. We got 6 oil and gas companies who have committed that they're going to do $25 million each in order to specifically help countries to be able to change. So Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, which joined the methane pledge. We had Angola, Kenya, Romania, Kosovo, all joined the pledge. So we're up at about 155 countries now that have pledged to do 30% reduction globally of methane by 2030. Pretty damn good. And we're on track, we're moving. We also have a new ability through satellites to trace the footprints. And any of you, represent big-time international corporations with footprints around the world. You can run, but you can't hide now. There's going to be an ability to trace every hour and a half. That satellites go around the planet, and they're going to be beating in on that. We can pinpoint methane leaks in various parts of the world, and we will. And we'll name and shame, and we'll be pushing like crazy to be out there getting this transition done. But there are a whole bunch of other things that have happened here.
Can I just push you on the Sunnylands point? So that was obviously, we saw this sort of side-by-side announcements from China and the US pledging greater cooperation. And yet at the same time, they continue to build coal plants. Does that sort of highlight the frustrations of and the contradictions of climate diplomacy? That
no.
We say one thing here, and we pledge, we make these noises here, and yet when...
Well, it highlights a difficulty, not the contradiction. It also highlights the complications of the realities of the marketplace. We are blessed. Yes, we are the largest oil and gas producer in the world, the US. But we're also living out a legitimate track to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And yeah, there's a slight bleep up, and I don't like it, but I understand it. And there's this just reflection of demand, massive demand. And we can't just come at this from the supply side, we've also got to come at it on the demand side. So IRA is a demand signal, massive, and it's having an impact. And there are other demand signals. The IEA, Fatih Birol and company, have come out with an analysis that they say they have detected an earlier peak in global demand on fossil fuels, and they foresee it somewhere in the next couple of years because of the rapid rate of electric vehicle deployment and also the rapid rate of renewable deployment. So the demand is already, they're saying this is a terminal decline, by the way, terminal. So if I'm an analyst on Wall Street, I'm going to look a little differently at oil and gas companies for the long haul here, and that will accelerate things. Also, job growth in the United States, greater in renewable sector than in fossil fuel. And many of the people in fossil fuel are finding it very easy to transition into these other disciplines because they have the skill sets, extraction and so forth. So I think we're just living in a very new world here. And I think here's the problem. And I'm not, everybody knows I'm not an apologist for China. I don't think there is one in the United States right now. But it's a fact, China only had coal and nuclear. They're building 22 nuclear plants. They are also building, manufacturing, and deploying more renewables than all the other countries of the world put together. And it's conceivable that China will have upwards of 3,000 gigawatts of new renewable power by 2030. So you got to look at this realistically. Yeah, they have these coal plants there, but they insist that they're the minimal backup for base load. They're the minimal backup. They want to find out how can we do a better job dealing with our grid? How do we integrate the grid? AI will play a role in this. But boy, we have all the tools, folks, that people are working on now. I just went up to Commonwealth Fusion in Massachusetts the other day, and it's really exciting what's happening there. And by 2028 or 29, they're going to be producing enough heat in a incipient commercial manner, that their next round, already they're looking at the build out beyond that, will be a real commercial enterprise infusion. That could be the game. I mean, it could be a huge game changer. And there are about 10 different places, companies that are chasing this. 2 or 3 of them are probably the most realistic, and we'll see where it goes.
Just getting back to US oil, one of the most notable things about this COP is how fossil fuel companies have been involved. There's, I think, more than 50 private and state-owned fossil fuel companies signed the methane pledge, and yet, we saw that Chevron and Exxon are not paying into the grant fund meant to help state-run oil companies cut their methane emissions. Do you think American oil and gas companies have now gotten religion on net zero?
Well,
are they now on that road with you?
Not all of them, no, regrettably. But let me be fair here. I want to be very fair. ExxonMobil is working with us on a plan they have to do an in-kind effort with on-the-ground training and working with people and being able to be helpful on methane. So they clearly are in a different, they're moving differently than Chevron. And we're hoping to close that out in the next hours, if not a couple of days. We'll work with the World Bank and have a manner of being really, hopefully, effective.
What more can Chevron do?
Beg your pardon?
What more can Chevron do?
Everything.
Tell me more.
Well, I very respectfully would just say that you can't be outside of this initiative. And we have no real evidence that they and a lot of others are doing what every company needs to do. Scope 1, Scope 2, methane 100% by 2030. This is what companies signed up for, by the way, in the initiative. I'm not sure who it came from, Saudi or somebody, but anyway, it was announced that there is this global decarbonization alliance, and these companies have come together. And look, it's not insignificant. A lot of criticism is leveled at the UAE, but the fact is that this is the first time ever that those companies have come to the table at a COP. Mm-hmm. And what they've agreed to do is not enough, in my judgment, but I'd rather have them doing it than not doing it. And that is a pledge to do net zero 2050, a pledge to do Scope 1 and 2 by 2030, a pledge to do all methane by 2030, which is really important for us, and to raise their CapEx on renewables, and to a couple of other things. But bottom line is we need, look, we've got to be honest here with each other, everybody, and that requires the oil and gas companies to be as equally honest with us. The evidence is overwhelming. There is no doubt about science. And that is why I say it is inexcusable. There's no reason to be permitting unabated efforts at this point. This is an urgency, folks. And so we got to get them to stop flaring. We got a whole bunch of flaring down in Texas. Not only is it a stupid thing to do because you're wasting gas that you could be selling, but it's dangerous and damaging to the atmosphere. Methane, folks, is 80 to 100 times more destructive than CO2 in its early years of exposure, and when it just leaks as methane. When you burn it, you get CO2. But when it's leaking and you're flaring, it just is not helpful. Iraq is one of the big flarers in the world, but they've agreed to try to work at this. We're sending people in to help them do it. And getting rid of those things, dealing with methane, folks, is not high tech. It's not complicated. It's basic plumbing. Tighten the screws, put in a new joint in your connectors, and it's also the single fastest, biggest, easiest, least expensive gain on holding the temperature at 1.5 degrees. So if you do the methane pledge, you're actually notching about 0.1 degrees, maybe 0.2, of of cooling, actually, of keeping the planet less warm. So that's another reason to want to do it. And you ask me, where are some of these other companies? They're not doing that. Mm-hmm. They ought to be doing that. They ought to be leading the charge. Not to mention that there's only one simple reason we are in the predicament we are in. No rocket science needed, no new algorithm, no mathematician genius. This is happening because we burn fossil fuel unabatedly in the world. And that's what's doing this.
So in the time we have left, I'd like to talk about the future. So you can feel American leadership at this, at this COP. We've made progress, but hanging over all of this, of course, is the prospect of Donald Trump coming back into the White House next year.
Is that hangover? I don't think so.
That's journalistic license. If he gets in, the prospect there's this prospect that all of this could be for naught. So that begs perhaps an awkward and difficult question. How good is the word of the United States on the international stage at this point?
I think it's 100% good, and I think that nightmarish prospect, I'm not allowed to comment on politics, actually, so I shouldn't.
Well, I'm not stopping you. I'm sure the room would love to hear
You'd love
all
it.
of your thoughts.
My body language was enough of a...
Yeah.
Folks, no, I am not worried. Honestly, could he or someone else who doesn't want to listen to the science, who doesn't read about it and doesn't care about the facts, have an impact? Sure. But they're not going to turn this around. They're not going to stop this. I will say to you, they're not going to stop what is happening on a global basis. This economic transformation is going to be the biggest transformation in human history. It's bigger by far than the Industrial Revolution, and it is going to happen. I have no question but that we're going to get to a low carbon, no carbon economy globally. I just don't know if we're going to get there in time to avoid the worst consequences I warned about earlier. That's the issue. That's why we have to accelerate everything. We know we can do it, folks. The IEA tells us that if we just deployed more renewables between now and 2030, we can meet our 2030 goals just with renewables. I mean, my God, Germany is getting up above 50% renewable. Other countries are at 80%, 70%, and they're not having problems balancing their energy supply. Their base load is fine. And there are ways to be able to do that, regionally and globally, if you can connect grids, which we can do. I mean, France sends Germany nuclear power. Norway sends Germany and other parts of Europe gas with pipeline. But we can do these things. We can connect these things. But we have to work at it in a really authoritative way. But look, Ford Motor Company, General Motors, they're both part of our First Movers Coalition, by the way. We created a coalition now of about 100 companies. Biggest, best companies in the world, as far as I'm concerned. You got Google and Apple and Microsoft and Salesforce and FedEx, Ford, General Motors, run the list, Boeing, United Airlines, big companies, MasterCard, big companies with big interests. And their CEOs are smart, and they've made smart decisions, and they're out there out front. They're buying green now to accelerate the message to the marketplace that you can do it. So Volvo, Ford, General Motors are buying 10% of the steel that they buy for manufacturing their cars is green steel. LafargeHolcim, largest cement maker in the world, making green cement. People are buying it not because it's green, but because it's really better. And you can run a list of these things.
But if I'm an oil company, you're criticizing some of the oil companies, is there not a risk that, I'll hear that criticism and I'll think to myself, well, all I need to do really is wait this out for another year and the other guy or the other party will be back in. I can just humor them and don't need to do anything.
But what I'm saying to you, you're missing, or I'm not being articulate enough and I need to say more. I don't believe that will happen. And the point I'm making is, if the CEOs of Ford and General Motors and Volkswagen and Hyundai and Toyota and Mercedes and BMW and blah, blah, if they've all decided to spend billions of dollars retooling their plants in order to make electric cars, You think they're suddenly going to decide because some politician in Washington or somewhere says, I don't like what we're doing? You think they're going to suddenly go back, oh, let's go back and make internal combustion engine cars? Not on your life. And every one of you here knows that. There's no going back. People are putting billions now. We have $1.7 trillion of venture capital moving into this sector. We're making headway on bringing the price of hydrogen down. Ammonia, we have the first ammonia ship is in here in port in Dubai. Fortescue, Andrew Forrest has brought this ship out, proving you can run them on thing. I just met the other day with the Prime Minister of Norway. He and I joined together to lead a thing called the Shipping Challenge, Green Shipping Challenge. We have Yara, Maersk, and MSC, all of whom have committed to buy and build or lease carbon-free ships. Because of the IMO decision, which we all worked on creating this summer, which has raised the requirements for shipping, we're going to see a complete turnover in the world's shipping fleet in the next 20 years. That's incredible, because shipping, if it were a country on its own, would be the 8th largest emitter in the world. So we're chopping away here, we're chopping away there. And I'm telling you, these countries aren't going to stop. Even when Donald Trump was president, 75% of the new electricity in the United States of America came exclusively from renewables. Now, obviously, he didn't know it, or he would have stopped that or tried to. But that's the reality, folks. It's happening. Governors, Republican governors, Democrat, they're coming together. They work together. Mayors all across America, more than 1,000 mayors are committed to this. So even though Trump pulled out of the, I'm proud to say this, even though Donald Trump pulled out of the Paris Agreement, the American people did not. We stayed in it, and that's why we're able to come back.
So unfortunately, we are nearly out of time, but I have one final question for you. You mightn't like it. You will be 80 next week, I noticed.
God damn you already.
This is a grueling and bruising business.
Yeah.
Do you still have stomach for the fight? Will we see you at the next COP next year, wherever that is?
Well, you'll see me at the next COP. Yeah. I'm not sure what I'll be doing.
In this job, I should say.
I have no idea. Honestly, I will be engaged in this effort till we win the fight, and I have my last breath, period, one way or the other. The private sector, I might add to all of you, I think what you guys are doing, what's happening in the private sector is really exciting. No government has enough money to do this. Let me be clear. When I left as Secretary of State, it was just clear as hell to me, because I was traveling the world, and presidents and finance ministers would say to me, hey, can you help us do this? We don't have the money. I mean, when I was Secretary of State, I think our budget was about 52 billion or so in the State Department. And that was for everything the United States of America does abroad. Every one of our missions, all of our programs, USAID, you name it, whatever. And it's really not appropriate for a country as wealthy as ours, and as frankly important in terms of technology and innovation and values and standing up for things, to be as crippled as we are right now in our ability to be able to do the things that are necessary for the planet. And so health programs in various parts of the world, our leverage and ability to help get the right decisions in certain countries, get people to have better governance. I mean, how do you go tell a country, hey, we think you got to reform and have a little more transparency and accountability in your deal making so we can bring more capital here. And you know, we talk about our democracy, and they look at us and they scratch their heads and say, well, how's your democracy working these days? You know, it's hard. Governing is really hard right now, harder than I think it's ever been that I can remember. And so we need to we got to change that. But I don't think the United States is word of scribble as long as we follow through. As long as we do the things. And the IRA, I think, was a really important reconnection on credibility, but also the other things we're doing. We just announced $3 billion for the Green Climate Fund. We are now judged by the OECD to have actually, you know, that famous 100 billion, where's the 100 billion? You guys promised 100 billion back in Paris. Well, we've done it. And by the way, we did it last year, not this year. 2022 is judged to have had the 100 billion. This year we'll have it. President Biden's put a $12 billion adaptation program, $3 billion a year for the next years. We're up to 9 something and getting, I mean, you know, we're moving, and despite these handicaps that we have. I mean, when I was in the Senate, I was there for 28 years. You know, we'd go out to dinner together and we'd talk, Republican and Democrat, and you had a lot of fun. And you know, you could have a bottle of wine and laugh and tell jokes. And I remember going over to Teddy Kennedy's house, and Orrin Hatch would be there, and John Warner from Virginia, and Mac Mathias from Maryland. And we go back to the Senate and get something done. Doesn't happen today. Everybody's running around chasing money.
How can that be changed?
You know,
how do you change that? That toxic.
Well, the best thing that could happen in the world would be for the Supreme Court, which won't happen right now, of the United States, to recognize that Citizens United has unleashed dark money and corrupt money and unbelievable amounts of money, and it's freezing the capacity for really good things to happen. The status quo is winning that part of the battle.
On that note.
Does that make you feel better?
It makes me feel great.
Look, I have to tell you, I'm a veteran optimist. Who was it who said, you know, or Winston Churchill said that democracy is the worst form of government in the world, except for everything else.
Right.
And there's a diplomat who...
You say the same about COP as well, actually.
There's a diplomat who came to the United States, and the diplomat from another part of the world, I won't mention where, was asked, what do you think of democracy? And he said, well, democracy is like sex. When it is good, it is very, very good. And when it is bad, it is still quite good.
Secretary Kerry.